What's up, everybody? Welcome to Heresy Financial. My name is Joe Brown, and today we got news that the Biden administration is now preparing for its next big spending package. It looks like the goal is going to be to spend up to $3 trillion in this next package, which might actually be split up into two packages, but the total $3 trillion is more than what Wall Street expected at $2 trillion. But that's the way these things go, right? 10, 12 years ago when we were dealing with the fallout of the financial crisis, everybody was shocked at the amount of money that the government was spending, the amount that the debt was growing by, the amount of the Federal Reserve's balance sheet was growing by, and that is absolutely nothing compared to every single new package that we've seen come out over the last year. That's the way these things go. Manipulation in markets always leads to an ever increasing amount of required manipulation in the future. So in this video, what we are going to look at today is, number one, what is this new money going to be spent on? What is going to be potentially included in the next one or two packages that are making up this potential up to $3 trillion that the government is looking to spend here? And obviously, the second thing we're going to look at is, what does that mean for you, your money, and your investments? Ready? Let's dive in. All right, so the main difference between this proposed spending plan and what has come before over the last year up to this point is basically the places that these dollars are going to be spent. So far up to this point in dealing with the fallout from the lockdowns and economic shutdown, COVID, things like that, all of the money, or most of the money, has been spent on really two major things. One is basically bailouts for the economy, and two is basically bailouts for individuals. A lot of the money went to buying corporate bonds to make sure that the value of debt from corporations didn't collapse. A lot of the money went to stimulus checks to individuals, to families, to households, to make sure that people had enough money to keep on, making ends meet. But by and large, most, if not all, of the money that has been spent so far would be considered non-productive spending. It wasn't spent on anything that would produce an economic return on investment. There's zero ROI spending. Now, this is the same thing that the government did in the fallout of the financial crisis 12 years ago after the housing crash. All of the money that the government spent, again, was considered non-productive spending. Now, when you compare this with some other countries like China, most of the money that they spent, yes, they increased their debt. Yes, there was monetary manipulation there. Yes, there's central planning there. Not debating any of that. Obviously, that is true. But what they spent their money on was largely productive spending. They built cities. They built infrastructure. Now, when you have central planning, and at this scale, when you have a small group of people deciding how resources are to be allocated, which is exactly what this is, you absolutely are going to have misallocation of capital. You absolutely are going to have malinvestments. And that's why there's ghost cities in China, right? You just can't, it's impossible to have number one, the right amount of information coming upstream from a local decentralized level all the way up to the top. It's impossible to get enough information to make informed decisions. And even if you could get all the information you needed, it's highly unlikely that those who are in the position to make the right decisions would actually make the decisions purely 100% correctly. There's always an incentive at that level and at that scale to make decisions that will benefit things, especially the people who are either in control or close to the people in control. And finally, even if there is a small team or a government who is able to collect all of the correct information that they need and has perfect morals and is able to execute decisions that will actually be the most beneficial to the most people, the ability to actually execute those decisions is many times not there unless you just have, a totalitarian dictatorship. Then you might have full control and ability to make any decision that you want, but then again, those first and second things are probably not there. In any case, we are now transitioning, and the amount of money that is planned on being spent, or that is being proposed to be spent in this next spending package, is about $3 trillion, and it looks very different than the previous spending packages. It's not composed of stimulus checks, it's not composed of tax credits, it's not composed of unemployment benefits, benefits or anything like that. It is a package designed to say, hey, here's all of the places into the economy that we want to spend money in order to actually achieve some ROI. Now, it looks like the proposal will be split up into two different packages. And so this first package would be spent on things like boosting manufacturing, improving transportation systems, expanding broadband access, especially to rural areas, and reducing carbon emissions, more of a green initiative. Now, allegedly, this part of the spending plan, it seems like some think that this has more of a likelihood to pass with at least some GOP support. And so it looks like that might be why they're planning on trying to split this up, because if they package it all up together, it might not be able to pass. Considering what's in the second portion, things like focusing on spending money to reduce economic inequities, federal funding for paid leave, universal pre-K and community college, that might be an accurate assessment that these would be less likely to get passed if they were all packaged up together. However, there's also a chance that these things isolated by themselves in the second package would be able to pass without any GOP support whatever. Democrats could pass it by themselves, just like they did with the most recent $1.9 trillion stimulus package that actually was the one recently that just sent checks out to people. Now, I mentioned earlier that spending packages like this, where a government or central planning committee, however you want to say it, when small groups of people, especially at scale, decide how resources are going to be allocated for a very large community, especially, let's say the third largest country on earth, the United States, you are at the very least going to have misallocation of capital, misallocation of resources, you're going to have malinvestment, and you're going to have second and third order effects that are unforeseeable and have massive consequences that require much larger band-aids to fix in the future. And I also said that this type of spending would be considered productive spending, especially from the MMT camp, where they say it doesn't matter the national debt, doesn't matter how much governments spend, because when governments spend, it goes into the hands of the private economy. And when they spend, all you have to do as a government is make sure that what you're spending money on will have a positive ROI for the economy. Contrasting that with what I said about the stimulus checks, just handing money to people, I want to give the devil's advocate argument here that says that, there's a growing number of people that are saying helicopter money is, number one, more of a free market approach in order to stimulate an economy, and number two, potentially has a greater positive ROI than a central committee or central planner or a centralized government deciding where resources are to be allocated. Because if you decide where resources are to be allocated, you're, like I mentioned, there's a lot of problems with that, and you have second and third order effects that are unforeseeable, massive consequences, malinvestments, misallocation of resources, shortages, things like that. On the other hand, if you just hand cash to people and that's it, you're essentially democratizing that process, and you're allowing individuals across a society, hundreds of millions of people, to decide for themselves in the free market how that money should be spent. And then as these people go out and buy things, that spending, that creation of demand, that money flowing into those areas will have more of a free market effect on deciding what areas of the economy should prosper, what areas of the economy should not, how resources should be allocated, and should potentially have an impact on creating jobs, especially in the areas of the economy that need it more. So I wanted to bring that up just so you understand the other side of the argument there. Unfortunately, we can look back at history and see governments and countries that have done similar things like this many times, and it doesn't normally end well. So like Yogi Berra says, in theory, there's no difference between theory and practice, but in practice, there is. So the key takeaway here and how it matters to your money and your investments is that this kind of spending isn't slowing down. Despite any signs of economic recovery, which is usually just signs of new money that has recently been created coming into a system and bidding up prices, that's not real growth, that's just price inflation. Even despite these signs, it doesn't look like the government has any plans of slowing down its spending. And contrary to historically how governments usually have to spend, which is take money from borrowing out of the economy, economy from savers or take money by taxing it out of the economy. They're not withdrawing money from the economy first in order to spend it back into other areas. What they're doing is just having their debt monetized, which means the Federal Reserve is creating this money out of thin air. And then they're using the newly created dollars to spend back into the economy. And as we've seen over the last year or so, the amount that they're spending into the economy, the amount of monetary expansion that is happening, and the pace at which it is happening, it is exponential. And at any time, if they take away the punch bowl, things start to collapse. So it's political suicide, which means the likelihood of the punch bowl being taken away is probably a lot less than the likelihood that the spending just continues to increase exponentially. Which means that when you look around at prices of commodities, of food, of services, of raw materials like lumber, you look at houses, you look at the stock market, as prices all around you start to look more and more like bubbles themselves, but everything is starting to look like a bubble, what you're most likely seeing is not that asset prices are experiencing bubble dynamics. What you're probably seeing is the beginning stages of a currency collapse. Historically, one of the best ways to protect yourself against inflation risks is to put some of your wealth into gold. The purchasing power of gold stays the same over the long period of history for thousands of years, regardless of what happens in the local currency. I've got my ultimate guide on how to buy gold linked in the description below. It covers everything from number one, how to start buying gold for your first time, how to buy gold if you have to do it inside of an account like a retirement account or an IRA, the difference between buying physical gold, storing it somewhere, buying something like an ETF, and more. So check that out. It's my ultimate guide on how to buy gold linked in the description below. As always, I really appreciate you guys. Thanks so much for watching. Have a good day.